Well, good morning, and thank you for that introduction, and thank you for the invitation. I'm honored. As a dyed-in-the-wool hypochondriac, however, Dr. Burnett's talk has given me a few nightmares. There is a connection. I'm going to talk about design, and I'm going to talk about invention and innovation, but there is a connection between Dr. Burnett's talk and what I'll talk about. I would describe him, aside from being obviously an extraordinary doctor, as an extraordinary anthropologist. And the whole question of how you actually understand what is happening in the spaces you work in and operate in actually is a deep concern for designers in particular. And so I'm going to give you a sort of overview, because it's unusual for a president of an art and design university to talk to a crowd like this, although I talk to many medical groups. An overview of how design has actually had a very profound impact on renal care. And I'll actually get into the details as the slides pass. So can we get the next slide? Okay. So I want to talk a bit about what design does. Okay. This is, all right. Thank you. Sorry. Technology unaware. I want to talk a bit about what design does and how we have worked on a bunch of different campaigns in British Columbia in particular. And I think that you'll see that there are resonances with what we're doing and what you are doing in ways that are somewhat oblique and then somewhat direct. So one of the really interesting projects that we have worked on for 5 years, and it took that long for us to get really to make progress on it, was this campaign on hand washing and hand washing awareness. Now, if you go to VGH today, you'll notice that the elevators have "Don't let germs take you down" and many other different comments of that sort. So when you begin to work in design, for us, for those of us that have worked with it for, in my case, for decades, one of the things that is most crucial to understand is that we're really trying in an ethnographic and anthropological sense to understand the user. Substitute patient, and you begin to see the resonances with the way in which healthcare operates. In this process here, we engaged in a very, very interesting long-term analysis of how people came into the hospital, how doctors worked with their patients, how nurses interacted with everyone, patients, doctors, and visitors. And we were initially quite dismayed. The statistics, as you know, are terrible on hand washing. And it took a long time for us to find the measure of a campaign that would work. One of the things that we look at as designers is that we look very carefully at how people operate in the environment they work in. One of the things that I think you need to understand about what we do is that when we deal with space, when we deal with movement, comfort, interaction, and service, we're actually trying to understand why someone would come into a hospital, understand exactly what they're going to do in the hospital, and then understand even more precisely how to make it comfortable and how to make the experience one that they feel will actually be productive for them. And so we were asked by Lionsgate, for example, to redesign their foyer, and that took about 1.5 years. Why did it take so long? It took a long time for the students and the faculty members involved and some of the professionals that we were working with to really understand the importance of a foyer. I would take the example of outside this room as a bad example of a foyer because it doesn't encourage interaction and standing around. It's so compressed. So what happened there is money trumped space. So the design of space and something I think everyone in this room is very conscious of, the design of space has a profound impact on patient care, on patient sensibility, on the outlook that patients have on the experiences that they have in hospitals. And so when we started working with people at Lionsgate and VGH, they were quite surprised by the depth of the questions that we addressed to them. There is this ongoing mythology about artists and designers that we are, in a sense, at the periphery, even though I'm fond of saying that the glasses that we are all drinking from here do actually have a history, most of which you're unaware of. And in fact, even if this glass were shaped incorrectly, which artists do a lot, right? They create these really weird shaped glasses just to knock you off your pedestal a little bit. But if we look at the shape of a glass, we're looking at the history of design. Look at the shape of a table, the shoes you're wearing. I mean, it goes on and on. But we tend to push that to the periphery, and because disciplines tend to be operating in a way different from each other, so architecture works in one space, and there's hospital architects, designers work in another space, et cetera, we don't, in the multidisciplinary sense, gain the advantage of the communication and conversations we need to have with each other. So one of the most important things that we engage with is a process of observation, and follow that up very, very strongly with a process of testing and then implementation. What's missing in that slide is the process of simulation and prototyping. So what we do is we build, and we have workshops at Emily Carr that are devoted to that. We build everything that we actually propose. So if we're going to propose some sort of, even in terms of the foyer design, we will simulate that by building it in a large room and testing our assumptions about how it will be actually used, and then taking that prototypical relationship that we've developed with it, going into the live environment and trying to figure out much more precisely whether what we're testing actually has any real value to the people who will experience it. So partly what we do then is a mixture of ethnography, anthropology, simulation, and prototyping. So if you keep those words in mind, you begin to get a sense of something that links much more profoundly to many other disciplines like engineering and medical care. One of the things that we discovered in dealing with patient care at Children's Hospital, and that was a very, very important and interesting experience, the emotional component, something that I think Dr. Brennan was getting to in his, I'll call it his anthropological presentation, because for me it resonated in that fashion, that we found that the emotional factors involved in self-perception that the patients had and the self-perception that the doctors had, that those emotional components, you can actually map all of that, but really what that's about is ultimately a form of intuition and a form of practice and a form of engagement. You would be surprised, or maybe not, that one of the most important subdisciplines of design is psychology. And we study and have classes that devote themselves to looking at not only the range of behavioral analyses, but also the range of deeper and psychoanalytic questions that are raised by experiences of this sort. So we had this extraordinary student who came to Emily Carr, who in her first year walked into my office and said, I am doing the following, and I need 4 years to do it. And she spent 4 years, I don't know if she went to any classes, but she spent 4 years developing the Snug Vest. You may have heard about it. It's now a growing BC company. Essentially what it is a vest that autistic children can wear. What used to happen is, now it's a bit more sophisticated. Her first prototype actually had a teddy bear. You held the teddy bear, and you pressed the nose of the teddy bear if you got anxious, and suddenly the vest slowly inflated, and then a hood came over your head. And so she began with the concept that, autistic children need that comfort zone, that sense of enclosure, that sense of tightening to overcome some of the anxieties that they were experiencing. She spent 4 years testing her assumptions at Children's Hospital in particular, but in other hospitals as well, and developed this vest, which Temple Grandin said, who is was the person most interested in it, said, this may be the invention that takes away the cow's machine that I was using for myself. And in fact, she's bought 5 of them and uses them actively for herself. So, the thing that amazes me is, here's a student who comes, had a medical background, a student who comes back from her experience of the world around her, and then develops something that has actually very, very important implications. And her way of describing what she actually achieved was to talk about this process of design, engagement, and artistic interaction. So the other thing we do is, and you wouldn't know it if you didn't actually look carefully at it, but if you look carefully at some of the assistive devices that we have developed over the years, and this goes back 20 years that we've been working in medical and health areas, you would discover that many of the components of devices that are everyday to our experience in dealing with different patients in different circumstances have actually been developed by very sophisticated design companies. And what we do is we actually draw that all in together. We work with companies like Philips, for example, and in particular on prostheses. So I show you that because one of the things that really excites me is that you're dealing with a whole new kind of student today, a different kind of learner, very, very committed to achieving outcomes that are definable. The learners of 20 years ago that came into art and design institutions were quite self-centered and egotistical. The learners who come in today are very, very outward-reaching, community-connected, deeply concerned about learning things that will have pragmatic and practical outcomes. It's a real wonderful, in my opinion, change in the way in which these students see their lives and their future. One of the things we did with Children's Hospital is that we tried to imagine how we could develop and use design to talk through the issues of creative exploration, especially with children that have either serious disease or are in transition. We developed an app that looked at transition as a process. It's an app that actually starts from being very sick and allows you to play a game as you get better. And so it's an interesting process of moving from illness to health, using the app as a means of both recording your experiences, but also engaging in a type of gameplay that allows you to think about what is happening to you in a much more interesting manner. What designers do is when they work with things like this, they're actually engaged in a kind of combination of elements, including, I think, and quite surprisingly, a linkage between engineering, medicine, science, and art. So if you think of those four components, you're thinking of a very different model for how we actually educate our children, even in elementary and high school. One of my biggest beefs about how our elementary schools are organized is that they actually perpetuate the separation of these areas that are very integrated in real practice in the real world. So it's almost like I want to bring the real world back into the school and show how integration actually leads you from specialization to generalization, from generalization back to specialization. We work with a lot of scientists. We develop taxonomies. We map disease, and we actually, with respect, again, don't want to pick on Dr. Brennan, but the slides that he showed, we work with visualization, and we try very hard, to work. What does it mean to actually fill out a checklist, by the way? Something to think about. It's a it can be, if you're ill, a very difficult process. It can be, for the person who loves you, even more difficult. Is that something that we might consider designing in a different manner? So, it'll surprise you, I hope, to know that a student arrived at Emily Carr who had a grandfather who was undergoing dialysis, and decided that he, the student, was going to solve many of the problems with peritoneal dialysis. When I spoke to him, I said, I think that you may want to think differently about that and isolate a particular part of it that you need to solve. It's too big a problem for everyone to be solved in the manner that you're suggesting. And what he did actually is that he went and he began to talk in great detail with his grandfather about the experiences that he was having. So he was documenting, he was testing the hypothesis, he started to play with prototypes. He discovered that his grandfather's major problem was that he had an arthritic, really strong arthritic problem in his hands, and he couldn't manipulate the clips properly at home. I'm sure you're familiar with that problem. It was really an interesting description that he made. He described his grandfather as fiddling around all the time. And consequently, as you're well aware, creating some problems for himself. So the student spent a lot of time working on this. He went through the entire process of learning about peritoneal dialysis, which took him 18 months. So I don't know what he learned in 18 months, because it takes years and years, but he learned a great deal. He began to document it. He began, in a sense, to develop a set of assumptions about the disease and about its treatment. He went into these are diagrams and illustrations you'll be familiar with, but he went into that literature. Now, this is a student, his name's Samuel Lee, who has since returned to China, who is revolutionizing industrial design in China. He is such an enthusiastic participant in this process. It's quite wonderful to get his completely illegible emails and try and figure out exactly how he is successfully engaging in this process. One of the things that he did was in order to come to this kind of analysis, we have a process that we call participatory design. And what that means is that you're engaging with the individuals most affected by the experiences that they're having. And it ranges across every type of experience that you might have in your daily life. Participatory design, co-design, terminology that begins to identify a little bit more strongly and much more profoundly how many different ways we can actually discuss with each other all the thousands of variables that go into everything we use. So you have to think of yourself as someone that is in every moment of your life. Many of you were, as I was walking through, were looking at your phones. Your phone is your most sophisticated designed object that you're holding onto on a daily basis, one of the most sophisticated that's ever been developed. But the user patterns that you're engaging in engaging with your phone, you don't actually think of very seriously. A designer comes in and starts looking at you looking at your phone and discovers that you're actually doing this a lot. And if you're a doctor, you realize that you're actually stressing the back of your neck and you're doing things with your arms. And the thing that I love, well, love is kind of contradictory, but the thing that I find fascinating is, you know, I was walking from the parking lot to here. There was not one person not doing this. They were all walking into each other. So there may be a new form of social engagement that we've discovered here with telephones, or there may be a new form of social isolation. But the point about it being that the designer is responsible, and I think it's an ethical responsibility. The designer is responsible for actually looking at those things, examining them, and trying to understand them profoundly enough to actually alter the physical shape and usage patterns that we engage with every day. So he kept on working on this, driving everybody insane in the process, trying to figure out how the ergonomics of usage would affect the psychology of his grandfather, who became increasingly exasperated with his own experience. He would talk to the doctors, and they would just say, well, you know, somebody should help you, but he wanted to be independent. I think these are things that you all know and experience. His vision began to decline over the course of the period of time in which his grandson was working on this, and so it got more and more difficult for him. So this is Samuel beginning to play a little bit here with the connective system that constitutes the peritoneal dialysis machine. And he played with 600 different types of clips. I never, ever knew that there were 600 different types of clips in the world. But he did. He shaped and reshaped. He used a process that we're specializing in at Emily Carr, which is 3D printing. We have a 3D printing lab that is the envy of most of the major universities. I keep encouraging UBC to get with it and understand that 3D printing may well be, and there's some work going on obviously there as well in it, but it's not as developed because there's a tendency again to isolate it as a discipline. He kept on working with 3D printing using different materials, different plastics, different sandy material that you can use, different excretions that you can develop for different kinds of printers. And with time, he came to the conclusion that he was, you know, getting somewhere in finding the shape and form that might make it easier for his grandfather in dialysis. It's very interesting to see how many different variations this student got into, how many different ways he thought about what a cap is and what grip is about. I'm fond of saying that the good designers are constantly worried that what they're holding doesn't have enough of the softness of shape that we are accustomed to because our hands are generally soft. And one of the things that designers are very obsessed about, and they talk about it incessantly, is simply that sense. For example, this is a good example of a poorly designed ergonomic piece here. You know, it doesn't encourage you to, you know, to hold it properly. You have to hold it and look what you're doing. There are other ways in which you can develop even a simple device like this. So one of the things that I just wanted to mention to you is how important ergonomics is and how important human factors analysis is to designers. Designers spend a lot of time in a methodological universe that is actually quite isolated from a lot of the work that is done in computer sciences. We're working with UBC in trying to break that. The computer scientists and those engineers that are attached to it work in coding, and they tend to see the world through a very limited refracted lens. The designer comes in and says, by the way, that word processing program that you developed 35 years ago is still in existence, and it's still as bad as it was when you developed it. Why can't you code it better? In this interactive debate that goes on between engineers and designers, generally speaking, the engineers win, because products are generally produced more quickly than they should be and generally less tested. It might amaze you to know that a lot of the medical equipment that we have is less tested than it should be in many cases, simply because ergonomics is not understood. Ergonomics and human factors are really largely the biggest challenge, I think, for all practitioners engaged with people in a social and medical setting. So let me just quote this to you from a really interesting piece here, and I rarely read quotes when I speak, but this one really struck me as important. Human factors and ergonomics specialists focus on designing user-friendly interfaces that can improve the user's performance and reduce human error. These specialists study the interactions between people and elements of the system in which they work: physical environment, tasks, tools, technologies, and organizational conditions, and redesign systems while systematically considering all of these interactions with the goal of joint organization of social and technical elements of a system. The joint organization of social and technical elements of a system. This is our big challenge. If there's anything that designers can do for the medical sector, it is to understand that interaction between the social and the technical, is to develop a really deeper sense of how the technical is never without the social and how the social is never without the technical. One of the great, I wrote a blog entry recently, and I'll give you the address for it in a moment, called Screen Panic. One of the things that disturbs me a great deal is the panic around screens. I have friends who are not letting their children look at screens for years in sort of a strange hope that somehow they'll not get polluted or affected, or somehow their eyes will not be bad or their minds will not go into the wrong place. What I'm fond of saying is, and this is how this quote fits into it, is that when you look at the social integration of technical experiences, when you look at how screens operate in relationship to our usage of them, you discover that it's a rich engagement that has a great deal of complexity to it that we need to disentangle and map. And the solution is not to isolate one child from that experience, but to engage with the child in some measure of conversation about the implications of it, irrespective of age, by the way. And what designers are so good at doing, and we have a lot of designers, by the way, who work at Apple, and they come up and talk to our students and so forth. These are graduates of Emily Carr. And what they do so well is that they think far more deeply and far in greater detail about this relationship between usage, experience, the technical, and the social. So I will run through, there were 140 slides, I reduced it. That's how many iterations this took. So in each case, he's looking at the way in which the clips fit together, the manner in which they're handled, the different ways in which you might actually feel and hear, by the way, the actual clip coming together. And hearing turned out to be a real challenge, of course, with his grandfather. So in a sense, we're talking here about the interaction of cognition and ergonomics, cognition and human factors. I just want to return for a moment to 3D printing. 3D printing is a really extraordinary invention, largely because it validates this process of engagement with prototyping. And prototyping is not something that is done without extreme care at Emily Carr and among designers in general. So they will not simply run to through the physical process of building a prototype and just do it for the fun of it. We were asked by Boeing to develop a new vision for bathrooms and airplanes. Not something I ever want to do, but The students came up with 150 different cardboard designs for different kinds of bathrooms. The one that won the competition with Boeing was one that had the very, very simple. It was just slightly rounded, so the edges were not as sharp, and that rectangular sense of enclosure was removed a little bit. Its key design feature was a ceiling that had the sky painted on it. Boeing went crazy. So what's interesting to me was in the conversations we were having with the engineers, we were saying, well, why is that very simple solution one that excites you so much? Well, if you have the chance to fly in a Dreamliner, you'll notice that they've incorporated that into the entire design of the Dreamliner. That is, that they've incorporated a visual element to people's relationship to space. And incorporating that visual element is a significant part, by the way, of the experience that we've had in trying to redesign hospital rooms. How do you actually create a physical space of comfort and reassurance? How do you create a space of interaction in that physical experience that is something that people will notice, that will shift the parameters and the baselines for how they experience what they're experiencing? Particularly for people with a long stay in hospital, that becomes much, much more significant. So the click sound, even with failing hearing, became one of the key components of this work that the student did for his grandfather and in general for the entire process. And what he finally decided was that there were 4 elements. There was the gesture of engaging with it that he needed to understand far better, and that he did understand at the end far better than he anticipated. There's the texture, that is the feel, the roundness, the length, the volume, all these elements and words that we often don't use in relationship to devices like this. There was the form, and then, crucially enough, the ultimate solution was in the color. So simply altering the color so that the way it clipped together was visible made it seem like, even though to varying degrees it wasn't that big a jump, made it seem like, for his grandfather, that he was actually achieving the outcome. So that brings me to another important comment. So in a general sense, let me just get this up. In a general sense, what I'm talking about here is a form of experimentation that mixes creativity and artistic sensibilities with actual day-to-day, life-changing and life-challenging experiences. And the terminology that is often not used in relationship to the medical experience, I'll give you a really good example. We talked about the blackboard, the ubiquitous blackboard at Children's Hospital. I don't know if you've seen it. If you go through emergency and you go into the back of it, there's the blackboard where nurses write down what's happening and where clinicians sometimes write down what's happening, and a lot of messy, messy text. It's like a surrealist painting. It has no logic. The categories are up there, but they mess up. And so we looked at it and we said, so from an information point of view, why would you work with that? What does that actually permit for you? What does it allow? How does it facilitate? Of course, everyone said it's a complete mess all the time and it's full of errors. And that their struggle is actually to maintain it. Now, so shift that now to the many computer banks that sit in emergency areas, and you've got an interesting problem that comes out of that, which is the vast majority of software still in use was designed for other uses. It's been adapted. It's code that's been colonized and brought into the use that you make of it. A lot of it is data-based. It's all built on early forms of Unix and Excel. And you're engaged in this complex activity of people pushing you to do things. You're pushing yourself to do things, and you have the worst visually engaged system ever built to understand the information you want to understand as quickly as you can to be as effective as you can. So aren't we doing something wrong? So as we worked more closely with the Blackboard, we came up with an app system that I think in the end, and we're not finished, may have some impact on people's sense of portability, movement, use. It's more, the sense of, I'm in control of the information. It comes a little bit from the handling and feel. Another example is the very fearful St. Paul's emergency I don't know how many of you have been at St. Paul's Emergency. It's fearful. It's frightening. And so we have approached St. Paul's and begun to talk a little bit about maybe a splash of color would actually alter this 19th century sense of walking into a space that doesn't really care, even though everyone who works in it is wonderful. They've got the triage booths are intimidating, they're not welcoming. Everything looks like it's happening behind a door. Now, if you know anything about theater, you know that anything that's happening behind a door is scary, right? Because any sound, any movement, any clanking, oh my God, what's going on? You're half out of your mind, feeling sick as a dog, and what you come into is an experience that doesn't actually open up. In a sense, the metaphor we use is, well, if you can't smell a flower in an emergency, there's a problem. Now, that may sound trivial, but it's actually not. So smell, shape, sound, the way a desk is configured, the way the best individuals with the best of intentions are hampered by the lack of design knowledge that goes into the experience that they have. So very quickly, I'm going to finish here because you're hungry, and just show you a few more slides that give you a sense of the kind of depth that we work into. So this is further prototyping. You'll notice that this individual here has her eyes closed. This person had to prove to Samuel Lee that she could do what her grandfather was going to do, and it was quite fascinating. It took her a long, long time. It became a good example of the problem that he had with his grandfather. Excuse me. Just some further process examples, and I wanted you to see this because this is the depth and extent to which just the little part of it that has texture that he actually explored with respect to every material that you could possibly imagine. He actually worked in a hospital for 2 years looking at materials. I won't get into the discussion of materials in hospitals. Here we go again. It's that, and companies that are directly involved in product development are engaged in this process. The biggest thing they miss, and we've had these discussions with some of the major companies in North America, the biggest thing they miss is just that kind of interface with intellectual and creative development. And I think that's something that they're looking at bringing forth in the next decade or so. We are in the golden age of this type of design, by the way, and I look forward to it as it grows more important in people's daily lives. So these are his grandfather's hands, by the way, that you're seeing. And I mentioned color, but I cannot give you the range of colors that this individual went through. He's either completely crazy or he's the best designer ever. I think he might be one of the best designers ever because his impact has just been enormous. We used injection molding. I wanted to show you this because it gives you a sense of the extent to which all these components are mapped in the engagement that these students develop. And by the way, to get into design at Emily Carr, you have to be so good. It's about a 15-to-1 ratio of demand to acceptance. We're a small institution, and purposely so that we can actually engage in directly with our students. I get to know a lot of them. But this is the type of mapping that we get into as we look at a whole variety of different issues surrounding the development of medical devices. So I'll end with that and let you have lunch. I hope it's been somewhat useful for you to realize that you're actually designers in waiting, and that at the end of the day, you're engaged in such an important series of tasks that I think, can be very helpful with, particularly with respect to emergency care, by the way, where we have a very strong specialty. So I would invite you to get in contact with me. I answer my emails within 30 seconds because I'm actually a cyborg. And I'm really interested in developing an openness that would allow you as a community in the very important things that you do to gain the benefit of what we do. Thank you. 10 minutes?
We've probably got some time for a couple questions.
Okay.
So thanks very much, Dr. Burnett. We probably have time for a few questions. If anyone has any questions, please make your way to one of the microphones. In the meantime, maybe I'll ask you a question. I work at St. Paul's Hospital, no, I took no offense at all. I think it's, I just wanted to point, I mean, it's interesting because if the emergency is 19th century, I think some of the other elements of the hospital are 18th century. But I think that, you know, I see something like this and it's inspiring because you realize how little I think we think about design in a lot of the elements, the way we deliver care. What have your experiences been in terms of trying to work within, whether it's the hospitals or the health authority systems, to actually try to implement some of these? Because that's what I see as a challenge.
It's been tremendous. Actually, I can only give you the most positive of descriptions. In general, both from medical practitioner side and hospital side, although there's an initial resistance to some of the students being a part of the process, it actually has proven to be very, very effective. And I would take Children's as the best example of that. At Children's, we have a long-standing, it's almost a 25-year relationship with many of the different departments there. And we will get calls now from different practitioners saying, well, you know what, we're, in particular, for example, around toys recently, you know, we're getting very worried about the toys that are around. We wouldn't mind if we could get into some joint analysis of the toys that are available, particularly for children between the ages of 4 and 8. Wow, wonderful. So I think part of it is simply just not knowing how much richness there is here. And that's just a lack of knowledge. It's understandable. But part of it is also, in some senses, a resistance to creativity. You know, I'm fond of saying, and that's why I love Dr. Brennan's talk so much, what he did was really, really creative. And he might not see himself as part of the creative sector, but in actual fact, I think he is. And I think you all are. The thing that I get worried about is when, you know, the social space we share, those divisions are actually amplified. As a way of saying, I'm a specialist in this, as opposed to saying, I'm a generalist with a speciality. It's a different mental sense of how you work. I was going to say that in relationship to palliative care, I had this very similar debate 25 years ago with Balfour Mount, one of the great people in the invention of palliative care in Canada, an area that I'm extremely interested in. What is the president of an art school doing saying he's interested in palliative care? Well, to me, end of life is one of the greatest challenges that we face both socially and culturally. It's actually about language and about communication, and it's about how you actually engage with the person or people or families that you're engaging with. It's about culture in the deepest sense in terms of cultural difference among different ethnic groups. I could go on and on. It would surprise you to know that this is something designers are very, very concerned about. So I think it's just a matter of opening the spigot. I don't think it's a matter of resistance.